Okay, we should be live.
All right. We are live. Let us know how the audio sounds this time around. Last month we had some issues with that. This is the Brandon Sanderson live stream for June and June 2021. This is the spoiler stream. I will be your author for the evening, answering questions, spoiling all books that I have written. Full spoilers in this stream. So, are you guys letting us know in the chat? Are we sounding all right? All right. Our audio issues have been repaired. So, spoiler streams. These are actually, I know you guys find them very fun. They are going to probably involve a lot of what I call a RAFO. I inherited this from Robert Jordan. Means read and find out. And when I RAFO things, it means that I don't want to answer right now. This could mean that I am planning this as some sort of interesting thing in an upcoming book. It could also just mean, and honestly, it's this like half the time, I do not want to canonize that right now. I don't want to answer you because I don't want to necessarily be on record giving that answer because there's lots of different ways I could go with that. Do understand that when I do give answers in streams and things like this, they are, how should we say, they are a lesser form of canon. I am free to contradict answers I've given before as I'm working on the books and realize I need to go another direction. It's part of the creative process. And so if you get an answer, it can stand until I contradict it in a book.
Stands until it doesn't.
Until it doesn't. That doesn't happen a ton, but it happens a significant amount. I'd say like maybe 1 in 10. I could be wrong on that. I eventually just go a different direction on for lots of different reasons and whatnot. And you're also fully welcome to ask questions such as, why did you decide to go a different direction on that? Like process questions I love to answer. I enjoy talking about why I made decisions that I did and things like that. But basically, gloves are off. You may ask anything you like, though it's going to be filtered through my team who already has a big list of questions from earlier, and we're going to start with those. So writing your questions in chat is not going to do much right now, right?
Correct. Unless the moderators see an incredible question, they'll add it to this list. But
yeah.
Or if I see one, but most of these questions are being pulled from the social media posts from earlier.
Yeah, and so we may want to decide at some point, Adam, to do like normal streams. We get most of our questions just during the stream, right?
It's hit or miss. If I see a really good question from the chat, I'll take it immediately when I see it, or I'll wait for your next.
But in a normal, like last month when we were doing this, where did most of the questions come from?
It was probably half and half.
Seated? Okay, half and half.
Yeah. I try and take questions from the chat as I see them because I want them to know that they're being read.
Yes.
And that they're.
It might be worth at some point
asked.
just doing a chat only Q&A sort of thing, but I don't know. A lot of these, it's nice to get the questions ahead of time. Even just in this case, it was only a day or so ahead of time.
Yes, I mean it was today. It was a couple of hours ago, just to make sure that.
Just make sure that we don't hit interruptions in the stream and things like that. But my instincts say there's probably lots of questions and comments that we would never run out of things to talk about.
I don't think that will be a problem that you have, Brandon.
Yes. Well, I generally don't have problem running out of things to talk about, or have a problem not running out of things to talk about. Let's hit me with the first question. Let's see how these are going.
This first one is from Avery Hinks. They say, is there a canonical reason why Vasher and Vivina changed their names to Zahel and Azure on Roshar?
Yes. It kind of comes into the fact, I mean, Vasher's gone through a bunch of name changes, and there are a couple answers to this. One is, in the Cosmere, like in a lot of kind of fantasy worlds, names and identity are just a pretty big deal. Part of how the magic works, how you view yourself. And I like, in that instance, indicating that time has passed and a character has adopted a new name and things like this. It's just, that's a thing. You've also probably noticed that behind the scenes in the Cosmere, there are lots of different groups vying for control and power and things like this. And so going under a pseudonym is actually pretty good idea. I guess an alias. They're not writing books. It's not pseudonyms, but you know what I mean. Going under an alias, generally a pretty good idea for just if you don't want attention from the wrong people. That said, I do have to balance this because I like for instance, in Azure's case, I picked something that Vivina had, Blue had been associated with her in the previous book, so it's not a complete leap. That's partially for the reader's benefit, so it's easier for you to track who is who just a little bit, and just a little bit easier to figure out who is who. But if you run into someone like Felt, right? Felt doesn't care. He's not hiding from anybody. Felt is, he's more like, I moved from Nebraska to Texas, right? And now I'm living in Texas. Like, that's more how he views it a little bit. He's not a secret agent. Big spoilers. Felt just, he moved. And so he goes by the same name. You'll see some of that as well. And if someone's going by an alias, I'm doing it to indicate one of those two things, usually.
The next question is from James Clifford. He says, science question.
Ooh, science. Is it real science or fake science? It is
Brandon science.
Fake science.
With the discovery of anti-investiture in Rhythm of War,
yes,
would the correct form of anti-investiture be usable to clear up the mess in the cell cognitive realm? If so, would this completely destroy a splintered shard?
That would not be a good idea. Let's just say that would be. So why would that not be a good idea? So no, this would not clear up the problem. The problem that's going on in the cognitive realm in Cell is that a bunch of investiture that should be in the spiritual realm has been packed into the cognitive realm instead through a very weird circumstance of events. If you were to introduce a bunch of anti-investiture of the right type there, you would just generate an explosion that would be a very bad thing. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. Investiture can't be either. So it's actually changing form. It's going from investiture into energy, which does not leave the system. And so the investiture will eventually make its way back around. You can't destroy anything, right, in the Cosmere. Just like you can't destroy anything in our universe, you can make it change form. And so what's going on there is just this hope by a certain individual that by what has happened there will prevent the power from becoming self-aware. This is an attempt to keep from having to basically, how Mr. Impossible in the previews for The Incredibles way back when, how he's always talking about he saves the world and he comes back, he's like, I just saved this place. It's basically Odium being like, all right, I just murdered you people. I don't want to have to come back and do it again. So he's trying to figure out a way to make this happen. And it was, as it currently stands, again, these things can change when I write future books. As it currently stands, it was partially happenstance that he took advantage of rather than something that he was able to set up very intentionally from the beginning. But he was definitely a part of that.
We have a question from the Devil Incarnate.
Ooh.
Will you
Beelzebub, hello. Welcome to the stream.
It's Kathy.
Oh, okay.
She says, will you base a character on Adam, and how horrifically will he die?
Adam does need a character. I haven't put you in yet, have I? So when I wrote The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, all of my brothers-in-law got cameos in the books, and Adam Adam has not yet had a cameo, and so we need to find a good cameo for Adam somewhere in the books. Yeah. So, how horrifically will he die? Well, Kathy, Adam is my assistant. I do not want him dead in any way.
I think it'd be funny.
He fetches me water and things like that, but Jane, his wife, did end up in the Alcatraz books as the royal fashion consultant. And Kathy has ended up in books, so we'll see. We'll see. Everybody eventually makes their way in. I'll have to leave a note to do something horrific to Adam.
Brett Roberts says, if Taravangian had another intellectually, quote-unquote, brightest day before his main event in the Rhythm of War, could he have seen the existence of other forms of investiture on Roshar? For example, would he have been able to recognize areas where there is use of sand, allomancy, or breath, or would those have been too small for him to notice?
That would have been too small for him to notice. Good question. But yes, too small, most likely. Like, he could intuit the existence of these things and perhaps the means of making use of them, but specifics are where they are, so that's going to get dicey for what could happen there. But when he had his weird day, weirder things happened on that day than him noticing something like that. I would say, in general, no. He would not have gotten that granular. So, yeah.
Edu de la Torre says, was Teff's death part of your plan from the book inception or series inception, or did you decide his fate while writing Rhythm of War?
So Teff's fate was decided pretty early on, but these sorts of things I do leave wiggle room on. When you read Teff's first appearance, if we ever do, it's in Mythwalker, my 9th book that never got finished. His appearance in that book was built around this kind of character arc that eventually happened, and this was baked into the original idea for Stormlight. Once I brought over Bridge 4 and once I stuck Teff in Bridge 4 from Mythwalker, but I do remain pretty flexible on these things. That is one that it turned out working really well and happening the way that I had intended it to happen from the beginning. But, I mean, if you've read Way of Kings Prime, you know that there was a point in the outlining process and even in writing that book where Dalinar killed Elhokar rather than him being killed by Moash. And so you can see that these things do change. These things bounce around. But yes, the Moash betrayal and the him killing Teff was an original, original this incarnation of Way of Kings. So the 2010 version of Way of Kings, it was part of that outline. But there are things that have changed, though, over the years. The big ones, of course, a lot of Adolin's arc was not in that, right? I go back to that one because Adolin was involved, but he was a much smaller character than he ended up being. And Adolin changing has caused all kinds of ripples through everything in large measure. For instance, all of the stuff with Maya was not in the original outline. This is stuff I developed over time because I was not planning Adolin to have as big a role in the series as he ended up having. So that's a good example of things that I've changed over time. A lot of the Cosmere aware stuff, I didn't know how much I would push on that and how much I wouldn't. And it turns out I've pushed further than the outlines I originally thought that I would. Because when I was starting this, I still didn't know if people would jump on board with this as much as they have. So feel free to ask for other things. I could probably think of other things that have changed. If that's something that's interesting to the chat, you can watch, and if they're interested in that, I can talk on that one more. But reading Way of Kings Prime is a great way to see how things have changed since. I mean, the big changes you'll see there between 2002 and 2010. I think I wrote the book in 2009 and released it in 2010. So in those 7 years, you can see a lot of the transformations that the book and the world and the series went through. It's kind of nice. Like, you probably, those who have read it recently, probably remember more things about what has changed than I do. I come back to the big ones, like that book had unmade spiked with crystalline spikes in the basement of the version of Urathiru before I changed it to what it is now. And that just is no longer in the books, right? Unmade
visual,
getting
though.
spiked, and being freed by spikes to the wall is not a thing. I'm sticking them in gemstones now, right? Instead of spiking them to walls. I felt like the whole hemalurgy thing we
Yeah.
covered well enough. So, but that's that was in the 2002 version, not in the
I would love to see fan art of that. Even though non-canonical fan art of Unmade being spiked to walls.
Yes.
Very visually cool in my brain.
Yep. It was 10 spikes in each one too.
Okay, there you are, artists.
Yeah.
Jack Milson says, how many awakening commands are there? Is there a finite number, a finite but large number, or infinite? Can you awaken with sign language?
Yes, you can awaken with sign language. I would say that there are an infinite number, would be my guess. It's either finite but very, very large, or infinite. But they're going to fall into groups as things tend to do in the Cosmere, I would say.
I see people in the chat wanting you to elaborate a little bit more on Dalinar killing Elokar.
All right. So if you haven't read Way of Kings Prime, one of the things that was interesting to me. So if you go way back to Dragonsteel, this is Dragonsteel pre-Prime. Okay. So I don't know what we're going to call this. This is the version of Dragonsteel that I wrote when I was that I started when I was in high school. The central premise for Dalinar's character, who he was in that book, was the person who's caught between his duty to his family and his duty to his country. So his brother dies, and the new king, and the original, the one I did when I was a teen, I wasn't as good with these things back then. The new king was a baby, and so Dalinar in that book's kind of thing was, how much do I take control as regent of this country, and how much am I disenfranchising my nephew? That was less interesting than what I ended up doing in Way of Kings Prime, which is where I realized this is a way better conflict if the nephew of Dalinar takes the throne and is a really bad king. Just dreadful and bad for everybody. And then Dalinar is trapped between deciding how much he loves his family and is going to follow them, and deciding how much he loves his country. And I put those two in conflict quite a bit through the course of the story until finally Dalinar duels and kills Elokar in that book. They all have different names. Dalinar's is close. It's the same name but spelled differently, I believe. I don't even know what Elokar's name is in that book. It might be Elokar. The chat can tell us, but it's Elokar. It's the same character. And that was like heart-wrenching and traumatic for Dalinar to have to go through that. And why did I not go that direction when I wrote the actual version of the book? It's a better book, I feel, if Dalinar has to continue to live with this thing, and if he legitimately loves his nephew and his nephew is trying. That makes the conflict just so much more heart-wrenching. Because in Way of Kings Prime, it's been a long time, guys. It has been 20 years since I have even really looked at that version of the book. But in that, I made it justifiable. I had to, because if you're gonna have a main character, do something like that, you guys, readers, kind of have to dislike, they gotta dislike the person, right? And they've got to be, I feel, on Dalinar's side, unless we wanted a different arc. You could totally write a different arc for that. But in that version, you get to the sense where you're like, Elokar has brought this upon himself. And I tweaked that by making him try harder, but just kind of be bad at it. Which just led to a better arc, and it let me do things in future books where kind of Dalinar is, against his desires, he is seizing control of the throne, right? He is becoming the monarch and has become the monarch, despite him claiming that he's not going to. It's just a better character treatment, right? You can point to a lot of flaws in Dalinar, but a big one is he is bad at delegation, and he is bad at letting other people do things poorly when he thinks he could do them well. And even though he says he's not doing this, he slowly grabs power through the first 3 books until he's completely in control and Elokar's been sidelined. And that's a flaw in Dalinar. But it's also, if you were living in that kingdom, you are glad it happened, right? So you don't want Elokar necessarily being in control. And it's supposed to, I feel like it just leads to better long-term storytelling, the way that I did it in the finished version. But we still get the Dalinar beats the tar out of Elokar scene in the first book, so that you can get some of that still in the published version. So
From the chat, Amber Birmingham wants to know if you have a prediction or an estimation on when Horneater's release will be.
Horneaters, if I do it right, is going to be the summer or fall before the 5th book. I think I believe, personally, on the hook for that one more than I've been on the hook for other novellas and things like that, because I deliberately left these things out of Rhythm of War, and it leaves a pretty obvious hole. I just didn't have the space for it, and it would have been distracting if I'd put it in. And so it is better as a novella. But if I don't do it soon, I feel like I will be breaking a small promise to the readers, which sometimes we do, right? Sometimes things miss deadlines and we break small promises, but it is a promise. The way that I wrote that and left out what happened, it's a promise that you will get this information. And 3 years may be a long time still to get that, but my goal right now is, again, the team cringes when I talk about this, but we're only 2 years away from doing the Words of Radiance Kickstarter, so I will probably want to provide a novella for that. Plan is right now, if I do that, I kind of, this is a much smaller promise, not even really a promise, but then we will have a novella between books 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and 4 and 5. But we will not have one between books 1 and 2. And just for sake of completionism, it feels like there should be a mini Stormlight novel, a novella, that takes place between books 1 and 2. And I would want to finish that, probably for a future Kickstarter. We probably also want to do the art book, though, for one of those as kind of things, and we do those on separate years. So eventually, I think there will be basically big Stormlight novel, mini Stormlight novel for all of Stormlight Era 1, if I'm on the ball enough to make it all happen. So stay tuned. We shall see how much Brandon is able to do, and how much he is not able to do. A lot of these things depend on how long does Book 5 take to write. I will be starting that in January. January 1st is the goal, and we'll see how long it takes. I would say it's going to be 400,000 words, but none of them have actually been 400,000 words since the first one, so they've all been longer.
Lars Vegas says, was Adonosium bound by any intentions like the vessels of the different shards are, or did they have free will because the intentions balanced each other out?
Raffo. How about that? There's your first Raffo of the night.
First Raffo of Raffo Fest 2021.
Yes, we will hold off on that one. The answer's pending, perhaps in Dragonsteel when I read it.
Roger Leathers says, hello, first off.
Hello.
First, I wanted you to know how your character development of Kaladin positively impacted me as an Iraq combat who lives with PTSD. I had a period of my life where I did not understand how my PTSD was affecting me and those I care about, just as Kaladin exemplifies in your work, especially in the last Stormlight book. I found solace in the stability in becoming a social worker and now help homeless veterans navigate civilian life.
Wow, what a great career.
That's incredible.
For you to have picked up. Good for you. Well done.
Your descriptions of Kaladin's experience with PTSD and other characters' experiences with mental health are great examples of the symptoms people struggle with, and I would like to thank you for bringing accurate descriptions to your readers. My question is, how did you prepare and research mental health issues and the specific diagnosis you describe in the Stormlight series?
So there's a lot to dig into here. I appreciate the question. The first thing I need to point out is really good beta readers are essential for doing this. And, I would also like to point out that while this is what I love to do in my books, particularly the Stormlight books, which are kind of intense character studies. I don't think it's necessarily something you have to do. I think it is okay to write adventure fiction without delving into the PTSD that would realistically follow the people who participate in said adventure fiction. But for me, this happened in part because I just have some dear loved ones who deal with some of these mental health issues. I've talked about my wife Emily, who has depression, for example, and one of the things that I noticed as I got older and met a lot of people and interacted a lot more is that there is no psychonormative. There is people, and people all deal with stuff. Like, I've talked before about how I am very even keel, but that itself is a thing, right? Like, if you don't know, if you haven't heard me talk about it, I wake up every day basically feeling the same. I am the opposite of someone who would be bipolar, right? Like, if you were to assign a feeling on a scale of 1 to 10, which is way too reductive, I understand, but this is just for sake of discussion of what we're doing now. Between, your happiness level, and you assign it between 1 and 10, I'm a 7. And I do not bounce between, I go between a 6 and an 8. But that means I don't feel 10s, right? I think a lot of people would hear that and be like, Brandon, I will absolutely take bouncing between a 6 and an 8 for the rest of my life. And I feel incredibly fortunate that this is part of my my psychological makeup and whatnot. But it does come with some drawbacks. For me to feel things outside of that, I usually need a really good story to convince me that I am someone else. And during that time, I feel like I experience things that I wouldn't normally in my life, which is what led me to being a writer, right? So there's that package. But even though, I have that, I do also have pretty strong insomnia, which, that's had a big impact on my life. I spent, 2 years in Korea doing church service, and during that, the thing to do was to get up in the morning with everybody else, and I just kind of struggled through it. I probably shouldn't have. I probably should have talked to somebody and whatnot, but I just, got 4 hours of sleep every night for 2 years because everybody else was getting up at whatever early crack of dawn sort of thing that normal people do, and so I just did anyway, and it did not work for me. I have a very different circadian rhythm, even when I'm sleeping normally, and when I'm not sleeping normally, I have no circadian rhythm. So, what is this to say? That's not me saying I understand what it is to be bipolar or to have dissociative identity disorder. I totally do not. But I think that a lot of times we like to put people in boxes that are like, here is someone who has mental health issues and here is someone who doesn't. And that's just not how human beings are. You've seen it in my works where I've talked about it, where it was very revolutionary to me when I don't think it's, I'll say it in the sneaky way. I snuck into a bunch of classes with my psychologist roommate because he's like, you want to see this? It's going to help you. And I basically audited unofficially. The psychology professors did not care. They're like, someone else wants to come to our class? Great. Normally people don't want to hear this stuff. But I still remember one lecture where the professor talked about the idea that mental health issues are best, in their opinion, diagnosed based on how they're influencing your life. If something is affecting your life in a negative way, then we treat it like an illness. That's something to be treated. If it is not, then it's not. And two people can have the same psychological makeup. And for one, it is a hindrance in their life and it is an illness, and we look at it. In others, it is not. Now, there are certain things that, that are more drastically life-affecting and hard to experience without them seriously negatively impacting your life. But that's changed the way that I view all of this, and I think it's a really useful way to look at all of this. So that's a long explanation of Why? How? Beta readers. Beta readers are so handy because they will set me straight. And I would not recommend doing anything like this without a solid grasp of how to take feedback and listen to people and to use beta reader feedback. Spending 10 years using beta reader feedback before I got published in order to just fix things like plot problems and character problems was an extremely strong apprenticeship for then being able to apply that to something that if you get wrong, you can do real harm. And so I am very grateful both that I never published those early books because I then had to learn how to do all of this, and that I have really good beta readers. Why do I do it? It's a caliber or an aspect to my writing. Ew, there you go. I'm not going to sneeze loud into the microphone. I'm try to avoid that. It's an aspect to storytelling that is just very natural to me. It's something I want to explore. You can see me exploring it poorly in my early and unpublished books. Way of Kings Prime has some much poorer representations as I am trying to explore the world around me and what it is to be a human being. I write in part to see through the eyes of other people. And so you see it in my books. You see it in Elantris, done far more poorly than it's done in the Wax and Wayne books when it comes to something like autism. It's just something that I naturally gravitate to and want to write. Why is this? It's in part because I feel like the more I've known people, the more variety of these sort of psychological makeups there are, and very few of them get represented in fiction unless it's a book on that psychosis specifically or that psychological makeup. And I just thought that just doesn't feel very real to me, and I would like to be reading more books where this is just an aspect of people's personalities, and yeah, they're gonna have conflicts associated with it, but the main conflict is an evil god might want to destroy the world. We should do something about that, rather than, yeah.
From the chat, Camposteria7 wants to know if Rosharans believe that their planet is flat.
Rosharans do not believe their planet is flat. You could find Rosharans who believe that, but most of them that you would talk to would just be like, what's a planet, right? Because if you go to rural parts of most of Roshar and you're like, what do you think of your planet? They'd be like, what do you mean by planet? They'd be like, well, the thing you live on. They're like, I live in Bavland. They're not viewing a planet. They don't understand like that. But like sailors all know that Roshar is a sphere, and the educated would definitely know this is not a question. But even talking in terminology of a planet, I feel is hard for the Rosharans because when you say the world, that they can grasp, right? They're like, oh, it's just everything. But when you say your planet or this planet, it makes you have to be like, wait, there are others? I suppose there are, but ramifications, and so, yeah.
Are there any Rosharans who believe that they float through the void on the back of 4 great elephants on the Great Artuan?
There are not, unfortunately, but,
I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of people who will know what books I'm reading right now.
Yes. But that, coincidentally, Your Majesty, is how we know that the world is banana-shaped. I probably got that quote wrong, but there's some Monty Python for you.
Yosef Joe says, if Brandon got a shard, what shard would it be, and what would he do with it?
I don't know. I've been asked something along these lines before. I do fit autonomy pretty well. But I also feel like I fit invention pretty well. So probably one of those two. There's definitely some that are not very Brandon. Whimsy, not a very Brandon shard. Let's just point that one out. But I could see myself with bunches of them. And what would I do? Pocket universes, and well, I guess you can't really create those in the, well, you can in the spiritual realm, but building funky planets and weird magic systems, like that's what I do anyway. You'd probably just float through the Cosmere and find just planet after planet of screwball magic system that people are trying to figure out how to use, and being like, wow, the person who did this, why did they make us use magic based on bagel flavors? This is not. Can't we have the one where we just fly? So yeah.
From the chat, Stuart Eliason says, if a planet was orbiting a black hole, would time be distorted in the cognitive realm and in that area the same way?
Yes. Good question.
That one was science-y.
Yeah, one was real science-y. And in fact, if you can get enough investiture, it'll do the same thing.
And that they actually have another question that our moderators pulled. They said, are the strange refractive properties of invested light related to the backwards shadows in the cognitive realm and Axes the Collector?
Yes.
There you are, Stuart. Corey Michael says, were the writers in the storm on Roshar prior to the shattering?
No, the writers. Raffo. I'll Raffo that. Good question. I better leave alone pre-shattering Roshar questions for the most part.
Jack Kimball says, could Ja-Anat heal a Deadeye by changing them?
Heal? That's going to depend on your definition of heal. But there are definitely some that would call what would happen, what would occur healing. They would definitely be different from the way they had been before.
Colby Bradshaw says, could a Spren bond another Spren?
Theoretically possible, probably not a direction I'm ever going to go in the books for, Inception recursive sort of weirdness reasons. But theoretically possible.
It's not where baby Spren come from?
It is. No, but yeah.
Arshara Elendil says, the AVR that we see in Six of the Dusk were all fruit eaters. Mm-hmm. They all have to eat the fruit that the grubs live in. However, Mraze's AVR seems a lot more like a predator than an herbivore. Did his species become extinct, or is it a unique AVR like Sek?
Neither.
Okay, there you are.
But yes, it is a carnivoristic AVR. I will confirm that, which it's not confirming much. You guys already knew that, but that is indeed what is going on there.
Nick Mancuso says, do world hoppers take time to adjust to the different gravity of a new world? How about in the cognitive realm?
Depends on how fast they get between the things. Most of the time, no. Because most of the time what you're doing is you're leaving a planet and going into the cognitive realm where, for the most part, you're going to have the same sort of feelings of gravity, and then you are walking slowly through Shadesmar to another place, and you're just not even noticing the minute changes. Now, if there were FTL travel or something, then yeah, you would pretty instantaneously notice a difference, but that currently does not exist in the Cosmere. People who are getting between planets either are individuals with no physical form as it currently exists, basically the shards, right? And whatnot, or are getting there through Shadesmar, basically by walking, or riding or something like that. There are no current faster ways, but I mean there are, because it depends on how fast you can get through Shadesmar, and what. Yeah, but I mean, even when Hoyd is getting between planets, it's taking him weeks or months. He's not jumping. They aren't actually hopping between worlds. They are trudging between worlds currently in the Cosmere.
Speaking of Hoyd, Fly on the Wall wants to know if Hoyd is afraid of the beyond.
Yeah. Let's say yes.
Okay, there you are, Fly on the Wall. Yoon Seo Chang says, looking at Allomancy, you've mentioned that over time the power dilutes and each ability becomes less powerful. For example, a Tenai in Era 2 will generally be less powerful than one in Era 1.
Yes.
Does the same effect happen in Ferrokimi?
Ferrokimi.
Blah, blah, I'm having a...
A lot of people call it Ferrokimi, which is fine also.
I think I got that from the audiobooks.
Yeah. I say Ferrokimi.
As well, how would Ferrokimi, I said it wrong anyway, become less pure diluted other than fairings appearing?
So I have not gone as far with Ferrokimi in that regard. I would say that it, if you're going to get a weakening of Ferrokimi, which you're asking about, is the amount of stored attribute you get for lost attribute, right? There is decay there. You don't get a 1-to-1. But Ferrokimi generally, I would say, is not much weaker than it was before. So a little bit, but not much. But yeah. But this was done partially for narrative reasons, right? I wanted Allomancy. I wanted to back off a little on Allomancy and tell stories that with it a little bit weaker. But yeah. Again, mostly narrative reasons at this point. At this point in on schedule, it's weakened about as much as it's going to, because by this point, you know, people are having children who are more powerful because of the certain mixing, right? It's not. I'm not saying it's going up. I'm saying they have hit an equilibrium on schedule for the most part, at least in the basin.
From Twitch, Unger Games 12 wants to know if you have a favorite magic system that you did not create.
Yeah, I've always been partial to David Farland's Runelord system, which is an excellent economic and social-based magic system. Basically, you can brand people with these magical branding irons, and as long as this magical link between you occurs, you are taking from that person some attribute. So you can, have their strength. But when that person gets killed, you lose that attribute, that thing. And he goes very interesting directions with that. Directions I've specifically not gone with some similar magic systems in my books. Like, he'll have a person who has the strength of 10,000 people or something like that, which is a really interesting way to take it. I would also highlight Melanie Ron's Sunrunner books from my teenage years as being one of my more favorite magic systems growing up. I liked a lot of aspects of it. I liked how it maintained a sense of both wonder and a sense of a rule-based magic system, kind of hovering in between those two poles in a really cool way.
CRS Crispu, as I guess I'll say, wants to know if there's going to be a magic system for every shard.
Yes. Whether there'll be books. So we get into a problem here is, what is a magic system, right? So for instance, like, would you count all of Surge Binding as one magic system, or is it 10 magic systems, right? Is Wind Running a separate magic system from Skybreaking, right? And is it the surges? Is it that? What do you call a magic system? Is the system of Fabrials a magic system, or is it a subset of what's happening on Roshar? And in that case, it's like, I delineated it pretty strongly in Mistborn, but in Stormlight, it's like, kind of Surge Binding is kind of honor and cultivation, right? And so what, is there a magic system for each of them or not? So the answer is yes and no, in that every one of the shards will inspire really interesting magic systems. But is there a 1-to-1? What do you call a magic system? And beyond that, will I have time to write books, right? Like, about all of these? I don't know. You can even look at Cell, right? And be like, all right, Cell has how many magic systems? Is it one? Is it lots? Is forging a different magic system from Andor, or is it two aspects of the same magic system? And so it gets tricky.
William Sawyers from the chat says, does the cognitive anomaly that exists in the Nalthian system orbit the star, or is it stationary?
Oh, boy. That's going to be... I'm going to raffle that for now because there's some stuff there that I want to deal with. Let's stay away from the cognitive anomaly for right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Raffo. Sorry.
From the Twitch chat, Galen Creeper says, what would happen if a radiant sprint went to the physical realm through a perpendicularity instead of the natural transition they usually do?
Raffo.
Okay.
It would normally just not work, but Raffo? Yeah.
Everyone heard you say normally.
Yeah. But, I mean... You have some stuff in the Rhythm of War that's like, ew. But, yeah.
From the YouTube chat, Luke Bertline, along the lines of biochromatic breath being akin to a person's soul.
Yes.
How would a shard blade react to someone who does not have any breath? Would it cut them like an inanimate object?
No. So remember, one of the things with breath is I consider breath to be part of someone's soul, but it is the extra part that the Cosmere has that non-Cosmere doesn't have. I don't know how far I want to lean into this, but there is definitely a part of me that thinks that drabs, people who've given up their breath on Nalthis, are just like people from our world. That's what they are. That if we went to the Cosmere, we would all be drabs. That even on planets that aren't Nalthis, where you can't take part of that and give it away and things like that, people are invested. They're invested generally more than here. Why do I do this? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, it's really convenient for some narrative reasons. A lot of books I'm writing are these kind of action-adventure stories, and can human beings actually take the punishment that is delivered, let's say, to Adolin in the end of Oathbringer? Right? Like, he doesn't come off well from that, but could a human being really take that? And I go back and forth. Like, yeah, humans are capable of some pretty incredible feats, particularly with adrenaline driving them. But my kind of blanket answer is everyone in the Cosmere's got a bit more investiture. Everyone's got something like breath. Nalthians have something kind of extra special because they can use it in different ways. But everybody's got something like that. It's leading to the fact that, for instance, I've highlighted this in the books. This part is canon. There are things about Rosharans that make it so that a lot of diseases just have trouble getting a foothold, right? You do not have the bubonic plague on Roshar. Now, you could maybe say, well, this is because they are not living in close proximity to mammals for diseases to hop species, as happens on our planet, which is a pretty valid point. Things that affect a horse or a cow, a lot of these are from cows that come to us. Things that affect a cow, more likely to be able to affect a human than, say, something that affects a chol being able to affect a human. Totally valid, but I also think that there's something more going on here. This allows me to do fantasy stories where, Nalthis does not, in Warbreaker, we don't have to be worrying about the next outbreak of smallpox, right? Which legitimately they probably would have to be worrying about. It means that while this is kind of a trope, like that people or trope is the wrong term. People in the past did not have as bad a teeth as we assume that they do because they did not eat the levels of sugars and starches that we do. But, investiture also in the Cosmere means you're not going to, Dalinar probably wouldn't have a full set of teeth, even, without getting punched in the face and stuff, if he were a human from Earth. Right? But on Roshar, he's got just a little bit extra vitality, a little bit extra something, just like everybody on the planet, that is making him a little tougher, and making them a little more disease resistant and some of these things, which is a really both, it makes the stories more fun for me to tell, and also gives us some suspension of disbelief on some of these things. We do not have to worry about smallpox outbreaks in most planets. You do have to worry about catching the curse of the Elantrian disease and being thrown, into a prison city. But smallpox, not as big a deal.
Yeah, but you don't have to worry about that too much anymore.
No. But I'm saying you could have to worry about things like that.
Gotcha.
Magical diseases, totally on the board. But the big plague that they're dealing with in Roshar is the common cold that got brought across by some of the members of 17th Shard, and that's going to die out pretty quickly. Like, they will get over it, and their immune systems, and you're just not going to. Common cold has come over multiple times before for reasons like that. Cold's just from another planet, and Roshar. They got 3 shards. They, basically, if you want something like this to happen, you go to a planet that's not quite as highly invested, where they might have a few more diseases. You pick one up, you bring it, it spreads a little bit, but then it dies off. And that sort of thing happens a lot in the Cosmere. So you do not have to worry about during the space age that people are going to be bringing lots of diseases across planets. So that's nice.
Best Barry has a riddle for you.
Oh dear, I'm terrible at riddles.
What kind of snake can change forms at will?
Not Solid Snake. He can become a box, right? He can get older.
Oh, that was funny.
What kind of snake? Give me an answer.
An anaconda.
Anaconda. Oh, I like it. Nice. Very, very good. Very good. It'd be even better if we had like an Anna on staff and she could be the anaconda.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah. No Anna.
Her official title.
We need to hire an Anna, just so that we can call her Anaconda.
We just hired a Hana. You could say Hanaconda.
Hanakondra. We hired a Hana. Is it my niece Hana?
One of Jordo's friends.
Huh. It's not my niece Hana. Yeah, because we don't hire, and people have to be 16 to get hired, and she's only 15. So, yeah. So all right. Well, Hanakondra. Let her know she's been nicknamed.
Tell her she has to officially go change her name. It's part of the job requirement.
Tell her that listening to Adam is not part of her job requirement in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that should just be a formal memo we send out. Okay, Zelriel says, is Nightblood considered a sliver after what happened in Rhythm of War?
By some definitions, tenuous. I would say for the most part, no. Some people might in-world disagree because Sliver's it's a moving target, right? But Nightblood shuts off pretty quick in terms of the amount of investiture that would come through something like that. And so while he did get a piece of that, technically anything he eats is getting pieces of shards. So I'm going to say no. It's with room for debate.
Bo B says, if all your main characters competed in a reality TV competition, like Survivor, Big Brother, etc.,
Okay.
who would win and who would be the first one voted out?
Okay, so this depends.
It probably depends on Survivor or Big Brother.
Yes, those are two very different competitions that a different set of people would be differently skilled at, right? Because if it's Survivor, Lift is lasting decently long. If it's Big Brother, she's probably out of there real fast because she eats people's lunches and they're just like, no, we're not dealing with this. We are not dealing with you. Teenage girl, goodbye. So there's just like one little example, but who does the best? Like, I don't even watch these shows, so I don't know who gets voted off. Right? Do people? Yeah.
Sophia from the chat has a pretty good answer.
Oh yeah.
Kelsier would win both.
Kelsier probably wins both. Yes, that's a good point. Yazna is going to be pretty good at both of them also. Is a thing, but I haven't watched these shows. Like on Big Brother, like it feels like almost that getting voted off. If you're like a normal person, like you will get voted off. Like I want to say like Renarin would get voted off early, and it would be to his credit that he does get voted off early, right? Like you do not belong on that show, bud. If it's Big Brother. But yeah, there we go. Kelsier and Yazna are among the last people standing.
A.A. Gopal from the chat wants to know if Kelsier in Fortnite is canon.
It is canon to Fortnite. It is not canon.
Wait, you're saying those dances are not, Cosmere canon?
I'd say that when he does, there's one of the emotes that's evasive maneuvers. It looks really cool with the mist cloak tassels. But no, not canon. I know you asked that tongue in cheek, but
Appearance though.
Probably canon to Fortnite, right? One of Fortnite's canon is all these people come to Fortnite and hang around and shoot each other. So I would say that Kelsier is amazingly proficient at firearms for it being Era 1, Book 1 Kelsier. He's raising some questions how he knows how to floss and shoot a shotgun so well, but yeah, there you go.
Evgeny says, are the Rhythm of War Seon communication devices called cell phones?
Boo!
I
love it. Evgeny, gold star. You're making everybody groan in a beautiful way. Nice work. You have brightened my day.
Yeah, that was fun. Moshe Ostreicher, sorry for butchering your name. The investiture on Scadrial is genetic. If someone was born from two different Mistborns on a different planet, could they be Mistborn?
Yes.
Okay, that was easy. I like those simple ones.
Yeah.
Griff says, are there any names you wish you could use for shards that just don't fit narrative?
Oh, I've thrown away so many of them, so it's going to be hard for me to give you any examples. Like, I've been working on this for 20 plus years where I'm like, is this a good word? Is this a good word? What's a good word for the idea I want to use, right? And so if I'm throwing one away, it's either because I don't think it works or because there's like some example in other media where that word is just too prevalent and too used. So I have to pass on this question just from I can't remember any.
Arya Berman says, what would the Unkalaki think of the Aiel and vice versa?
I have this feeling that the Aiel, I have this feeling that they would really like the Unkalaki. But I can't say for sure. I just get this feeling that, the fact that they are the Unkalaki are going to share their water and shade with you really, really easily and friendlily, and that they have some pretty cool water, is probably going to appeal to the Aiel. What would the Unkalaki think? They think that all lowlanders think weirdly and behave weirdly, and I don't know that they would think the Aiel are any more weird than a lot of the lowlanders they meet.
Friend of the channel, Daniel Green.
Hey, Daniel Green. Hey.
Says, if you could write a script for any superhero, who would you like to control a story for?
Oh, what a great question. I did actually see a comment on YouTube, by the way, Daniel, where apparently in one of your videos, you're like, Brandon's made a really shrewd marketing move by putting Kelsier in Fortnite. And then I released my thing where I'm like, yeah, Donald and I were hanging out being like, well, hey, why don't we put Kelsier in Fortnite? And we're like, yeah, that'd be fun. It was a super shrewd marketing move on my part to go to dinner with my friend.
It can be both.
Yeah, we were actually chatting about my brother or my son wanting to put something in Fortnite but can't decide. And we ended up with Kelsier instead. Alan can still do something if he wants, but getting him pinned down on what he wants to do. So what superhero would I want to write for? I would most likely pick Superman, because I feel like he is the most challenging to write for and make work, and I feel like my talents would match that pretty well. But it would probably be like a weird color of kryptonite story, like a red kryptonite thing, right? Where it's like Superman's powers have been changed in a funky and interesting way. Now
That doesn't sound like something you would do.
something I would do. No, never. So Superman's powers have been changed in a funky and interesting way, and also let's deal with why Superman stories can be so difficult. And write that. Obviously, that would be a bad like film sort of thing, but it would work well in a running comic where it's one installment because it's so different from the norm. Great question.
Michael Rapp says, we know that soulcasters who soulcast long enough become savants and that manifest physically.
Yes.
Is what happens to people during the Sheod related to savantism?
It is
Don't know if I pronounced
related. You got to watch out for terms like that in in detailed Cosmere questions because, of course, they're related. Are they related in a significant way that you should draw parallels between? Probably not. In that they are related in that being highly invested does things to you. So yes. But savanthood is a different style of your spiritual DNA being rewritten. I mean, that is what's happening when you're becoming a Lantrian. So how about I give you a halfway in between significant and not significant? Moderately significant relationship between these two things, but not a direct relationship. Yeah. Sorry, that terminology is kind of weird for me to parse with, is it related?
Gotcha. Snowday, please, says, near the beginning of Rhythm of War, it mentions there being only 3 Truth Watchers. The first 2 are Renarin and the Stump. Who is the third?
Raffo.
Okay.
Yep. I wouldn't lose sleep on this one. I'll just tell you that.
They actually have another question. They say, Ashonai's one experience as a mate was a quote-unquote disaster, and Relane's time in mate form, quote-unquote, didn't turn out the way he expected.
Yes.
Is that implying what I think it's implying?
No, they're implying different things. With Relane, it's just that it turns out he was solely attracted to other men, right? Not a disaster, just not what he anticipated. And Eshonai, I'm not implying the same thing there. I'm implying that when she did a mate, she just did not like being in that form. It did not mesh well with her. She embarrassed herself in ways that Eshonai outside of mate form considers that entire time an enormous disaster and a huge embarrassment. Does that make sense? Makes sense. So I wasn't trying to draw a correlation between those two. It's a good question to ask because the structure of how I wrote those is very similar.
Robert W. says, does Yazna still consider herself to be atheist, and what would she have to see in order to change her view?
Yazna would stop being atheist if she got definitive proof of an omniscient and caring and omnipotent God. She does not, and I kind of agree with her, consider the shards to be gods, capital G. They are, in her realm, these are beings that, everything's invested. They're invested more. And so atheist means she does not believe that there is, in these terms, an omnipotent God. It doesn't necessarily have to mean loving. I might have said that, but no. She just doesn't. She means there is no omnipotent, omnipotent, capital G God. She doesn't think one exists. So she would need to have irrefutable proof that they do, or that they did, and then she would believe. Cool. Doesn't mean she'd worship, but it would mean she would believe.
Gotcha. Dave Smith, since he asked so nicely, wants to know if a Mistborn can burn any god metals such as Tenavastium.
Yes, they could.
Okay. Me, My Skirt, and I says, Radiants stay invested after death in the cognitive realm. Does this mean that the Nahel bond lasts until they go beyond, or does the bond end when the body dies?
So, Raffo, we'll add one to the Raff Olympics. Good question. I like the way you're theorizing.
Alex M says, what's the difference between an avatar and a splinter?
All right, so a splinter, these are all very weird terms that I'm just using. So a splinter is a person who has held the power of a shard and then let go of it. A briefly held time holding the infinite power of a shard, but no longer does. So what does that do? That changes your soul and leaves markers on it. It is a real physiological thing. Adam's really smirking at something.
Yes.
He read. So somebody, you managed to make Adam smirk. An avatar is a shard manifesting a semi-autonomous piece of themselves that is still connected to who they are. And so an avatar, for instance, of autonomy, depending on how autonomy creates that avatar, might know, might not know, but they are still an aspect, they are still part of autonomy. And when you get down to it, a part of them knows that, and it is almost like a god role-playing, but in a way that only a shard or, a lowercase g god of the Cosmere could do.
I'm going to have a hard time getting through this one, I think.
Okay. Oh, it's the one that made you smirk?
Yes. So
Okay.
Jeff S. from the chat says, Brandon, how much truth...
Oh,
Sorry. How much truth would a truth watcher watch if a truth watcher could watch truth?
Oh, yeah. A
don't know
truth
why
watcher would watch all the truth if the truth watcher could watch truth.
There you are. Oh, my word. I don't know why that got me so hard. Anyway, Snow Day, please, has another question saying, does the fact that singers have red bones mean they have red teeth?
I have not indicated that to the artists, so I'm going to say no. It would cause a revolution in fan art, though Isaac can overrule me on that as he's art directing and things. It probably would make sense for them to have red teeth. But we haven't done much color art, and I don't know if they've ever been smiling. They probably would, but I have not described them that way. I don't think I've described it the other way either, so we could move forward that direction. But yeah, they probably should have red teeth.
That'd make interesting fan art, or interesting art.
Like, yeah. It looks pretty cool. Red teeth looks kind of nifty. I do like that.
Sinister, but maybe, anyway.
Sinister to our preconceived notions of what is sinister.
Yes.
How I'm kind of designing the singers. Yeah.
Archmage from Twitch says, 2 questions.
Yeah.
If a splintered shard is somehow reformed, is it possible to change...
Splinter. You said they asked Splinter, and I answered Sliver.
Yeah, the whole chat.
The whole chat caught me on that one. Okay, what is a splinter? What is a splinter? All right. A splinter is a piece of a shard that is fully autonomous, where an avatar is not. So something that is splintered does not consider itself and would not be considered by the definitions an actual piece of it and has free will. So once it has free will or could develop free will, because some of the splinters haven't gotten there yet, but is fully cut off from the direct control and self-identity of the shard, then it is a splinter. Sorry. You guys are all on it.
Yeah, sir, and I'm always behind in the chat because I stop on a question.
Yep.
Anyway, so Archmage from Twitch says, if a splintered shard is somehow reformed, is it possible to change the word that expresses its intent? If Kaladin wasn't in the arena in Words of Radiance, would Sahel have intervened to help Adolin?
Okay. Are those 2 separate questions?
Yeah, 2 separate questions.
Okay. Read the first one to me again.
If a splintered shard is somehow reformed, is it possible to change the word that expresses its intent?
You would, yes, but that's a very implausible thing. depending on how. So you're getting into some weird Cosmere stuff here. So most of the ways that these different shards could manifest could be described differently, right? Odium is trying very hard to describe his shard as something different. And there's an argument there, right? But it depends on if you're like actually changing it or if you just want to call it something different. Like you could just call Odium hatred and it's not going to change anything. But if you wanted to change Odium to mean passion, like Odium thinks that it means, then that's more difficult. So there you go.
Gotcha. And their second question is if Zahel would.
If Zahel would have, I will Raffo that, but a different kind of Raffo. In that, I don't think Zahel himself knows what he would do in that situation. The better part of him would want to have, but he is not living his best life right now, shall we say, right? He is not living up to his potential, and he knows it. And so, would he have? He should have. But would he have? Good question. Even he doesn't. I don't think that he could answer.
Lotus says, if one was world hopping to Nalthis, what type of customs would they have to go through?
Nalthis customs. I mean, there'll be some tariffs to pay depending on what's going on. I mean, it is kind of not that different from what you would imagine. What I have read about in sort of Renaissance times, like pay your fees, things like that. But it's not really something I have to worry about quarantines because of the disease factor. It's just not on their radar for the reasons I've explained. You don't have to worry about that. Like dangerous items, like what sort of dangerous items are you talking about, right? I do think they try to prevent people with breaths from leaving the planet, particularly lots of them. So if you're getting off, I would say is a little more tricky because they do not want the breath bleed of investiture leaving their planet, but I think you will find some notable examples of it happening. So they are not impossible to dodge those customs.
And I've seen a question wanting you to elaborate on what Raffo means. So maybe there's some new watchers that we can.
Raffo is a term I inherited from Robert Jordan, which means read and find out. And so he would answer questions Raffo if he didn't want to answer them for any reason. I generally have said my Raffos fall into 3 categories. And sorry if for those I'm repeating some of this information. But the first one is, this is plot relevant, and I'm going to be answering it in an upcoming book, and I just don't want to spoil that book. Raffo meaning number 2 is, I'm going back and forth. I haven't decided. It's something that can go either direction. And Raffo number 3 is, I haven't even thought about that. I don't want to answer it right now. Who knows? I have to ask Peter and Karen, right? Like sometimes I Raffo because I'm like, that's a question Karen could answer that I can't right now because I don't have my notes on me and I rely on separate brains.
Adam Kilgore from the Facebook chat says, do you think Randall Thor is the most powerful being in all fantasy? And I'm going to add to the question, if not, who do you think, or who would you place as number 1?
Most powerful being in all of fantasy? Well, I think that there are multiple Tolkien Legendarium people. Is that what they call it? Tolkien Legendarium? The Tolkien lore people who are more powerful than Rand, right? So I would say no. But I think we have to restrict the question a little bit because a lot of fantasy has the fantasy story of the all-powerful deity that creates the world, right? Like, for instance, the creator in Randland is more powerful than Rand, right? But if we restrict that question to primary viewpoint protagonists, is Rand the most powerful that we have met? People who get significant amount of airtime and things. I'm going to say I can't answer because I haven't read all fantasy. But among fantasies that I have read, I think he's got to be up there, right? By the end of A Memory of Light, I would say he is. I can't think of one who's more powerful. How about that? I'm sure that some people could, but for instance, is Gandalf more powerful than him? I don't know that he is, and I wouldn't even call Gandalf primary viewpoint protagonist, right? So yeah, I don't know. Write in the chat if you can think of primary viewpoint protagonists who are more powerful than Rand, and see if there's any good answers that come up.
King's Daughter 13 says, Arion from the Belgariad. Does Kellen agree with this? Because she's a big...
I'm a big Eddings fan.
Is Garion more powerful? I mean, there are characters in that series who are more powerful, probably. But I don't know if Garion is.
Yeah, I haven't read all of Wheel of Time, though.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I've read them both. I'm going to side on Rand, though Garion's a good argument. You make a good argument. Garion barely knows what he's doing, even in the last books. Yeah. So I don't know about that.
Martin Machado says stick.
What's that? Oh, the stick? The stick. The stick.
It could be fire.
Is not a primary viewpoint protagonist.
Yes.
Only one viewpoint in an April Fool's thing that for the stick. So yeah. As always, I enjoy stick memes. But
okay. Hannah Alexander says, when Syl's talking about remembering Cal's childhood and says, quote unquote, there was another voice, pure with a song like Tapped Crystal. Was the other voice Tanavast?
Rafa.
Okay. Last Adventurous to Arif says, how do you decide to turn Taravangian into Odium? How did you decide?
How did I decide to do that? So a couple reasons I decided to do that. So this was one of the things that it didn't have to go this way. So it is actually a good one I can talk about because I had multiple options here. And even until the last, until I was like turning in this outline to my team and saying, all right, it's time to sink or swim. Do we like this or not? I was going back and forth on it, really until I'd written the scenes and giving them to my alpha readers and said, all right, are you guys ready for me to pull the trigger on this? Because there are costs, right? The major cost is that Odium is a better ancient unknowable evil, right? Odium was filling the role in the books of Sauron. Ancient thing, very dangerous, very strange, very powerful, and whatnot. And the thing is, my books aren't really about that, right? That's not I mean, I will write books dealing with some of that sort of stuff, but that's not the sort of thing that is as exciting. It's not really as much a theme of my stories, the ancient unknowable evil. Like the whole purpose of Mistborn, one of them, it's not the purpose, but is that even the Lord Ruler, you got to know. Even Ruin became a character that you understood. And so because that's not a theme, it is a cost, I will admit. It wasn't as strong for me as it might have been somewhere else. And I do know that some people would prefer that. And I can understand why, right? Like Sauron makes a pretty great bad guy. Ancient, powerful, unknowable evil forces. But I feel like I get that in the Shard itself. And one of the things that I plan to play up more as the Cosmere goes forward is that these powers have some sort of primal sense to them, right? And that's always in my mind been the bigger danger than Rey's, right? Is that so? That is like the negatives were not that big a negative. And what are the positives? Well, in Oathbringer, Dalinar did not fall to Odium. That is a huge blow to Odium, Rey's Odium, right? The fact that basically at the end of book 3, he was defeated in a major way. And then in book 4, he gets defeated again, right? This time by Kaladin. We have proven that 2 of our primary viewpoint protagonists of the Stormlight Archive are able to resist and defeat him. And my opinion was that by that point in the Stormlight Archive, Odium Rays would no longer be a threat. And you run into this actually in lots of long-running epic fantasy series. I've talked a lot about how when I was designing the Stormlight Archive, the things I had read in other long-running fantasy series were a big part of why I designed it the way I did. And for instance, in the Wheel of Time, it was very difficult, even in the ones I was writing, to maintain a sense of threat for the Forsaken when they'd just been defeated right and left every book, right? They do get their licks in now and then, but I mean, it's real hard to keep considering Balsamon from the first one to be a threat when, boy, Rand defeats him and defeats him again and defeats him again and then defeats him again. And this is a problem for a lot of media, right? How threatening is Magneto really when he never wins? And so after this point, at this point in the series, what I wanted to do was hit you with a left hook from somebody that I considered more frightening, more dangerous, more capable, and who had been growing as an antagonist for a while. And while, some of his ploys had not turned out, he is still very threatening. And my hope was that this reveal to a portion of the audience, I knew that some would prefer Odium, but I hoped a larger portion would be like, oh, this just got real. And I much prefer, I've mentioned before that my favorite antagonist is Magneto. I brought him up before. I like characters who have clashes, antagonists who have clashes of ideology, not just clashes of forces. And a reason I'm not as excited to write about somebody like Sauron is while there are clashes of ideology behind the scenes, on screen, for the movies and books, it's basically Sauron wants to rule the world and we don't want him to. That works really well in Lord of the Rings because you have, as I've talked about, part of the brilliance of Lord of the Rings is both having Sauron, Saruman, and Gollum to represent 3 different kinds of evil and 3 different kinds of antagonists that work in tandem really well together. And it's part of the brilliance of Lord of the Rings. But I like having a villain like Taravangian. Taravangian who has a worldview that is a certain worldview and that is terrifying because of how that worldview is. And so elevating him to Odium so that you mix that with the kind of ancient spren of hatred that is still a very big, dominant part of what he's now become. I just thought made for a more compelling and interesting villain for the fact that we have many more books left in the Stormlight Archive and in the Cosmere. And I had done with what I wanted to with Ray's Odium. So there's my answer. It is totally viable viable's the wrong term. Totally understandable that you would have some would have preferred me to go a different direction. But my instinct says, and I haven't done any polls or things on this, that the majority of fans are going to like this direction better, and I certainly think the story will turn out better. So that's what led me to make that decision. But these were all things I was heavily considering. Adam was there watching those emails go around with me and the team when I was asking if I should pull the trigger on this or not.
I was there 3,000 years ago.
Yes. It was like there are a couple of things that I've made decisions on that have been some of the most difficult or most far-reaching in that regard. I think I've made the right decision, but the other one is bringing Kelsier back, right? So Kelsier, I seeded all this stuff in the original book, the books to bring Kelsier back. But then I backed off on it, and for a while I'm like, I don't think I'm going to bring Kelsier back. And during that whole thing, this is a fun spoiler thing that I don't think I've talked about before. During that time in the outlining, some of you may, again, have much preferred this. Tensoon was actually going to be Thydakar, wearing Kelsier's bones.
Interesting.
Yeah, there was a time where I was gonna play with a Khandra, not a Khandra believing they were Kelsier, basically. In this case, Tensoon. I was gonna go this direction where it's like I'm the survivor. I'm picking up the survivor's heritage, and I'm doing all of this sort of stuff. I did warn you all about spoilers. And there was a time in there where I decided, no, I'm gonna leave Kelsier dead. That I'm going to go this direction. And why did I back off on that one? Well, a couple reasons. Number one, I feel like I really did a solid job with Lessie in the second of the Wax and Wane books, which was a similar conflict. And I felt like I got that out of my system, right? And I did it well. I think that story, has some really heart-wrenching things. But as I wrote that story, I felt like it was a one-book story. And one of the things I've come to be aware of as I've written, this stretches back to the days of Elantris, where my original ending had too many twists. And it's been changed, right? Like, I had some weird twist where Hrathen had secretly, come to Elantris at some point and like had a heritage that made him made him Aeonic and things like that. And it was dumb and it didn't work. But it was like twisting for twist's sake. And part of me worries, and part of me actually doesn't just worry. I think that if I'd done that whole thing with Tensoon, it would have been less cool than what I just actually wanted to have happen, which was to give a full finished character arc to Kelsier. And so at that point, I went back to what my original plan had been. And I picked up those threads, and that's when I wrote Sacred History. Was after I had finally made that decision. And it comes with costs too, right? Everything comes with costs. Having a main character die in such a spectacular way and then be not quite dead yet, it has certain costs in your narrative. The more you do that, the less that death is is meaningful in the stories. The more it feels like a gotcha. And things like that. And yet, at the same time, on the other side, I don't think Lord of the Rings is weaker for having brought back Gandalf, right? I think Lord of the Rings is stronger. And why is that? Well, Gandalf comes back changed as a different person and makes the story more interesting for having returned. And my original plan with Kelsier was just more interesting in the long run. Forcing Kelsier to do these things and fit, he did not complete his character arc, and that's part of why it was so heart-wrenching to lose him, which I understand. And so bringing him back in that regard lets me finish his story, and I just think that's going to be more satisfying. I gain more than I lose. And plus, there's the fact that someone comes back from the dead in the first chapter of the very first Cosmere book. And so second chances at life is a major theme of the Cosmere. Both Warbreaker and Elantris, that's kind of, Warbreaker, it's like the primary theme, right? Second chance at life. You're doing a different thing with your life than you thought you would do, and let's take a second stab at it. And I think that being able to play with that with Kelsier is a stronger narrative thing to do. And this was also influenced by my, as I've talked about before, sort of shrinking the time scale a little bit of the Cosmere so that more of the characters from the different books can interact. It just makes better storytelling. So I'd say, yeah, those are the two things that in outline, I could have gone different directions when I actually got to the story. When it was time to write Secret History, I had to make the call, right? And he had been dead, he'd been alive, he'd been dead, he'd been alive, at least in my head. And I made that call. And the same thing actually happened with Taravangian. It had been, am I going to pull the trigger? Is he going to become Odium or not? And I actually vacillated on that and eventually have made the decision I made.
Are you ever going to reveal what the alternate was going to be, kind of like what you just did?
Oh yeah, maybe eventually I will, but for now I will not. But yeah, it's easier to reveal in the Mistborn because it's basically all in the past, right? And it isn't to say that I won't do something else like that with a Conjure. I might, but man, Leslie's story covered that real well. So it also kind of is why also, and who knows what I'll do, but I've backed off on, for those who've read Way of Kings Prime, right? Taln's original story was the story of, am I an angel or am I not, right? Am I a herald or am I not? Am I this divine being or am I a normal person? And that actually plays real well in Way of Kings Prime. And it is just not a thing I could make work in the actual published version of Way of Kings. It's one of the things that's cool about Way of Kings Prime is being able to see some of these ideas that I can't express in the actual series. And part of the reason I can't is also, number one, like, I wanted to bring, the Voidbringers in and all of these things, and you just can't. The more fantastical your book is, the less the reader will be able to suspend disbelief about your character who claims that they're not some mythological legend from lore, actually not being, that mythological. Like, they walk on stage and they're like, I think that I'm this mythological legend of lore, but my powers are gone. 99 readers out of 100 will be like, yep, I believe you. Even though the rest of the people in the books are going to be like, no, of course you're not. The reader, because it's just cooler that way. And it's very hard to fulfill on good promises by not having that turn out that way. And beyond that, the story I wanted to tell, involved Taln. And so, big surprise, Taln is a herald.
Yeah. Michaela B. from the chat says that Fortnite Kelsier is actually 10 soon.
Fortnite Kelsier can be 10 soon. That's right. You can go with that if you want. That explains why he's so good with guns. 10 soon's been world hopping. He visited Taldane and learned how to load a rifle.
Michael Christopher Giant says, did Sazed get memories as fast as Taravangian when he ascended?
Yes, he did, but getting memories and getting these things and knowing what to do with them and stuff are different things. But yeah, I would say the experience was somewhat similar.
Alex Herrera says, have any decisions you've made been controversial within your team?
Yes. Famously, Peter Ahlstrom doesn't like Dreamer, which is my goofy little short story. That's his least favorite Brandon Sanderson story. I don't know that counts, though. Deciding to write that story. What's been controversial among us? Is there
well, I mean, I have one, but I can't. I think it's hard to say without spoiling
future property.
Yeah. So
you can tell me what that one is after.
Yeah.
But there are things like, I don't know. I mean, I can't say. Yeah, you probably want to talk about about Cytonic, right? Is that the one? There are some things that we did with Cytonic, and I don't want to talk about that either.
No.
It's spoilery. But when Cytonic's out, we can talk about some decisions I made which were controversial, but they're more controversial with my editor and my agent. The actual Dragonsteel team was on board with changes.
I mean,
it's the vibe, like Peter and the team, the editorial side here, we vibe really well together. Decisions I make are rarely unpopular because the team... Yeah.
Well, and this might even be more of a question for me, where sometimes when you've given us outlines of what you think you're going to do, I might have some reservations, but every time you do it so well that you've built a huge amount of trust, and I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of the people watching right now. So, it's hard to have reservations when you deliver every time.
There's been controversial feedback among beta readers.
Oh, yeah, beta readers all the time.
Yeah, but we don't care about them.
No, we do care about them, and I like that they just...
Yeah, I know, I'm just...
I make a lot of decisions that the beta readers... I would say there are very few that I make that the overwhelming majority of beta readers don't like, But the beta readers get split 50-50 quite a bit on things. And it's one of the interesting things is like, the beta readers hating or loving something is interesting to read. Within the team, though, probably this is going to be funny to people, but probably so the way that I describe the front of the Fourth Bridge airship coming down, and the art for it, Peter pointed out this art does not match the description as well as I would like it to. And Isaac and I are like, it's close enough. We're close to the deadline. We're just going to go with it. That was pretty controversial choice because Peter's like, but it doesn't actually match. And Peter's job is to be detail-oriented on letting us know this is a continuity error. You are introducing a continuity error, and you know it. But at the same time, getting another draft drawn on that piece was not something we just had the time to do. And so I just said to Peter, it was an early draft of the plans that Navani drew, and it actually ended up being a little different. Stuff like that. Though that can be controversial because, we have some very detail-oriented people in the team whose job is to be very detail-oriented and anticipate what the fans are going to complain about. And sometimes we don't have the bandwidth to actually make those changes. It's like when Moshe wanted me to change podium and lectern, and we went the rounds on that. Those are more controversial than other things like this, which is kind of funny, but
Sophia has a question, and it's been a minute since I've read Era 1, but they say, are any of the Lord Ruler's descendants alive during Era 1?
Raffo, a lot of people have asked that. The descendants of the Lord Ruler only are things I've confirmed in Words of Brandon.
Okay, gotcha.
They are not confirmed in book. But Raffo, they did exist. He has had progeny.
Yeah, I did see a question. I scanned past it, or I lost it. They said, which cosmic character would dominate the world fastest, and why is it Yazna?
Yazna's a good choice. Why would it be Yazna? If Yazna decided it needed to be done, Yazna is the most self-aware of her own moral philosophy and why she makes the choices she does. And because of that, she is able to act decisively because she has already considered the conundrum and the moral dilemma of the item ahead of time, which gives her just she doesn't need to second guess herself at the level that, for instance, Dalinar spends a lot of time second guessing himself. Yazna does not. She does spend a lot of time up front making her decision about what will happen in certain circumstances if she has to decide.
Pat Jacobs says, Harold Nail seems to have direct control of the spren of his order. Do the other heralds as well?
No. Good question. No.
Amber Birmingham says, would someone with a strong moral compass, such as Kaladin and Dalinar, consider Wit's alignment moral?
Wow. Dalinar is more likely to understand than Kaladin. Because Dalinar has been in positions. Kaladin is less likely to, but it depends on what aspect of what Hoyd's doing you're talking about.
Ollie Kid says, are the Kandra the positronic robots of the Cosmere?
No, the positronic robots of the Cosmere are the Spren.
Cool. Ben Puffer says, for the Steelheart series, do you feel like the main protagonist is on the spectrum? Because when I read it, I identify the most with him, and only realizing now that I am on the spectrum, I realize that he could be too.
He could be. Definitely has some aspects. I didn't intentionally write him that way, but I wrote him to a personality, which, as we've talked about, yeah, I could. I mean, he's definitely got some things going on there that there's a good argument. That's David Charleston of the Reckoners.
Ethan says, can Navani leave the tower and still do surge binding? Could someone who bonded the Stormfather before he merged with Honor's cognitive shadow do surge binding when a high storm wasn't around?
Raffo.
Yeah, I figured that was coming.
Great. That's a great big old Raffo.
Tony Patrick says, where did you get the idea to have multiple moons in Roshar or on Roshar?
On Roshar? I have no idea. It's gone back so far. I mean, yeah, no idea. I like doing weird things with the cosmology and with planets and things like that. And I liked, like, the most recent, like, for the 2010 version, looking at the moons, was I wanted to subtly indicate the presence of three gods, and kind of subtly give some color scheme indications of them and things like that. But they aren't, one to one. But yeah, just that idea, because everything was based around 10. I wanted some threes hanging around in the world building as well.
From Twitch, and I'm assuming I know what you're going to say about this. Why does Zeth's Spren not help him as a shard sword, even though he said the third ideal?
Raffo.
Yeah, that's what I figured. But they seem so polite in the chat.
They are very. That's good that they're being very polite. Let's just say that the high Spren are not are perhaps a little bit different from other Spren.
Nathan Wheatley wants to know if Hoyt has a favorite color.
Sure. I've actually answered this before, and I can't remember what I've said.
So Google it.
We're gonna say black right now.
That seems pretty good. Jao Araujo, I'm sorry. Who can consume more investiture, Nightblood or Cherry Cherry?
Nightblood. Cherry Cherry will get full a lot faster. So.
Happy J. Adams says, do you know the frequencies for the pure tones of Roshar? And if so, what are the frequencies for the pure tones of Roshar?
Raffo. Man, we've cruised along.
Yeah.
We've only got 20 minutes left.
Yep.
Okay.
Are you going to go for the full 20 minutes or just until the stack is done?
We'll see how long the stack takes
Okay.
me. But we will go the full 20
2
minutes.
hours, okay.
Yeah. We'll go 2 hours.
Padawan Moses Galen says, since Teff is dead, may he rest in peace, could you tell us what his fourth ideal would have been if he had spoken it before Violet killed him?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Fourth ideal for Teft. I would like to give that more thought rather than be on the spot for it here. So it's a Raffo, but not a promise that I'll answer you. There are things I would want to consider before I answered that. It's a great question. That's the one I'm saddest to not be able to answer, but I don't think I can answer that on the spot while I'm doing other things right now. It deserves more consideration than an off-the-cuff answer.
Valerie Mastkovich says, was there something special at Urithiru before the city was built?
Rafa. Yeah.
I like that question. I hadn't thought of that.
I actually have thought about that one.
That is not surprising. Black Flame Omega says, does quote-unquote light in a vacuum become unkeyed until exposed to a vibration upon leaving? And what happens if that vibration isn't actually a pure tone?
It can be overwritten and things like that. Like, you can unkey that vibration and then and kind of separate it. But, yeah. There's... Whether it's even fully unkeyed, to be perfectly honest, I can't even say. Like, you are dampening it, right, and then overriding it with something else. But this is kind of outside the world. They wouldn't be able to measure this. But I don't even think it's completely unkeyed, like Navani thinks it is, before she rekeys it. And the mental component on her part is pretty important to what's happening. And so, yeah.
Hatham A wants to know if we can do another Europe-friendly stream sometime.
Yes, we can. I mean, that's kind of up to Adam, but we really should.
We probably should have. The next more open Thursday, I'll do it.
Right. Well, we need to plan it ahead of time and let them know.
Well, I mean, I can just check the calendar.
Yeah, we can check the calendar, but
I mean, I'll know a month in advance. At least.
Yeah. But we can do one of these during the day. That works for us, right? If we just do it during the day.
It works perfect.
Yeah. It's fun for me in the evening, but my Thursdays are more open now that I don't have my class.
Ramba Rao says, do the Terrace prophecies only refer to the hero of ages on Scadrial, or could they also apply to a person or people in other systems? Are there heroes for other systems?
That theology was only talking about Scadrial. Doesn't mean that there aren't people in the Cosmere who would interpret that and may take it and run with it, but they were talking about Scadrial. Hey, Kara is here.
Yay!
Have they brought us food yet, Kara? Do you know?
Have they brought what?
Have they brought us food?
Yeah.
So-
It showed up. The other's not here yet.
Ooh.
Traffic is terrible today. So,
Which half is here?
The sushi.
The sushi is here.
the good half.
The good half is here.
Well, it just means mine's going to be warm still when I go upstairs.
That is true.
Adam's half is the pizza half.
Yes.
And it's California Pizza Kitchen, so it's cool pizza.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, there's almost no bad pizza. I had one really bad slice of pizza in Cuba, but I can't list too many.
I've had bad pizza in Korea. Now, bad is obviously a
Very relative.
very relative term, but it's hard for me to eat pizza with crab shell claws on it. Number one, I do not like crab claws, but number two, like eating pizza and spitting out shell is just not a thing that I enjoy. But also I do like the American style pizza that has lots of cheese, and that's just not as much a Korean thing. You get it from Pizza Hut in Korea. It has lots of cheese. There's certain types, but I've gotten plenty of pizzas in Korea that are like tomato sauce with a sprinkle of Parmesan. And, that can be tasty. Like there's some more authentic pizzas that are like that. I like my cheese, so.
Yeah, someone described a pizza, your Korean pizza, as a horn eater pizza.
Horn eater pizza.
Which is pretty
Yeah.
accurate. It sounds
Yeah.
terrible.
I would be shocked if all the random crab claws that showed up in things that I was eating in Korea did not have an influence on creating the horn eaters. You'll be eating a soup and you're like, oh, this is a nice beef. A crab claw. Okay. I'm exaggerating. That only happened like once or twice. It doesn't happen that often. And usually if you don't know what you're ordering or things like that, you're like, I think I'm getting kimchi jjigae, but it's haemultong. But,
So Evgeny just said that if next time you're in Chicago, he'll get you some deep dish pizza.
Chicago deep dish is, it is great.
Are you Chicago or New York?
I like them both, right?
Yeah.
They're different cuisines.
Almost different foods.
Right? Yeah, like that debate is hard for me because, it's like, do you like fettuccine Alfredo or carbonara better? And I mean, they're similar. One is actually authentic Italian, and one is, a thing we made up over here. But I like them both, and that's the way I am with those pizzas. Not the way I am with cheesecake, though. I much prefer a New York cheesecake to an Italian cheesecake. Junior's cheesecake is divine, so Italian cheesecake lovers, I'm sorry.
Rubes, never mind. Tima says Vin, quote unquote, sucked in the mist with a deep breath. Also, the mist was, quote unquote, leaking from her arms. Is that similar to Stormlight?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
100%. In fact, you should notice when shard blades form, they take a certain shape, substance. Have you never noticed that?
No, I did, but it's
Before they
think about it.
solidify. So, yeah.
So Rubes, at the end of Rhythm of War, is the coin that Hoyd had before meeting Odium a metal mind?
Ah, Raffo.
Not surprising. I mean, that just happened.
Yes.
Helen, that just happened. Samuel Webb says, do you know Taravangian's fate in book 4 when... you already talked about that.
Yeah, if I hadn't gone this direction?
Yeah.
Yeah, that question. Someday. Why don't you give me a couple more? I mean, we've got like 10 minutes here, right? Yeah.
I guess the time didn't work. Sorry about that.
What? The time?
Oh, I was worried that it was gonna last a little longer.
Oh, that's all right. No, you can just put the stack right here, and then you don't have to clear these ones.
I mean,
Stack.
that's what he's going to be signing next time he's down here. So,
Yes. Next Wednesday, I will be signing stuff. So,
Bubbles Sore says, sorry, I just scrolled up. Could you have trapped the mists from Scadrial in a gemstone?
theoretically possible.
Okay. Michael Kernan says, how would a dinner party between Kelsier, Hoyd, and Harmony go down, and who else would be invited?
All right. Kelsier, Hoyd, and Harmony. Mm-hmm. Hoyd and Kelsier squabble the entire time, and Harmony tries to get them to stop.
Who's cleverer, Kelsier or Hoyd?
Or Hoyd? I guess
Probably.
It depends on the situation and what you even mean by clever.
Yeah.
Hoyd thinks he's cleverer, so we'll probably...
He has a lot of practice,
He has
too.
a lot of practice, so yeah. Kelsier would lose patience with Hoyd before Hoyd loses patience with Kelsier.
Evan Motter says, wants to know if you have a favorite type of investiture.
Favorite type?
Or are they all like your children?
They are all like my children. So I don't know. Yeah. That one's a Raffo, but I'm never going to answer it, so just read and don't find out.
Kaladin Stormblessed, wow, he's in the chat, says, did Ironsides mean to refer to Spence's pen as a pen of a traitor so early on in the book?
Yes, I feel like
Yeah.
she did. I'm not sure why she wouldn't have, because by that point everyone
knows.
that Spence
Oh,
is,
everyone.
unless they're asking maybe if Ironsides shouldn't have known that pen was Spence's father's pen. She could have thought it was given to her by somebody else, but yeah. Hey, that was our first Skyward question.
Yeah. That's one reason I wanted to ask it. Voted wants to know if Hoyd was burning Bendeloy in the Braze vision.
Raffo.
Nara, oh man, I'm not even going to try. What does Taravangian, as the vessel of Odium, think of autonomy?
I will Raffo this because it's going to be relevant. So,
Lexa Smith says, has a Shard's vessel had a child after Ascension? If so, have we seen them? Will one become important to the Stormlight Archive plot?
do you consider all of the people on Scadrial to be the children of preservation? And
I think I will just wait for you to tell me.
I would count them all as children of preservation and ruin. They created them together. I don't know what other way you can interpret that, because the first ones of them would have had no other parents, right? So yes to that, but it's not what you're asking. Otherwise, Raffo.
Okay. Timothy Ketting says, if Adolin originally didn't have a significant role, was there another character that you planned to have a larger role but changed your mind?
Adolin? No. There's nobody whose role has been diminished. Part of the reason the books are longer than I thought they would be, because everyone likes to throw, justifiably so, the quote at me where I'm like, I think book 1 is going to be the longest, right? Like, I don't think the others are going to be this long. Well, turns out that adding another main character is one of the things that makes books go longer. When I'm like, well, I need to give a nice arc to Adolin in every book now. And suddenly, giving a nice arc to Adolin in every book means that we got tens of thousands of more words that we got to write in every book. That's not the only reason, but that is one of the reasons why the entire series is longer, is because I did that. So nobody's been diminished. I've only found room to expand, which I knew would happen, right? That's why I built the interludes the way I did and why I moved things like Horneater to novellas, is I do not want the side stories to overcome the main story. It's part of the reason why we got 2 bricks of 5 books rather than one 10-book arc. Is I worried that that at that length it would involve spinning of heels rather than coming to actual conclusions and climaxes. So,
Miss Silver says, did anyone actually try to assassinate Wit in the Way of Kings or Words of Radiance?
yes.
Okay. August says, what is Brolin? Slow Swift mentioned them in the same breath as Spren and Shades.
Rafa.
I figured that would be.
Yeah. Oh, was Slow Swift the name of the person who asked that? Did you say that, or did I just hear you wrong?
You heard me wrong. August was the name.
Okay.
Doomslug
Ooh.
said, if Roshar progressed and industrialized, would caffeine Spren come to existence with the advent of soda?
Yeah, I bet they would. Absolutely. I mean, if you're getting alcohol spren, you're gonna get caffeine spren. They probably wouldn't be
Soda
called that.
spren?
You would probably call them like alertness spren or something like that, when you are alert beyond, so maybe not even alert. It'd be like a term for when you should be sleeping but you can't because of stimulants. Stimulant spren, wired spren.
What would you call
Hyper spren?
carbonation Spren?
What's that? I don't know.
Bubble Spren?
Yeah, maybe.
What was it?
Tara says she's already bonded.
Yeah.
That means friends over
It's the highest Spren you can bond,
There we
so.
go, yes, yes.
I'm your friend's side hustle.
Brad at... I'm not going to read that.
Okay.
Will every death rattle have a canonized point of reference at some point in a coming novel?
I don't intend them all to. I intend most of them to, but I don't intend them all to. Some of them happened, but were not relevant to the story on screen. Is what I've decided.
Here's an interesting question.
Let's do this as last question.
Oh, okay. Voted 117 says, if you have caffeine, can you store that as wakefulness in a bronze mind?
I think that you can. But I think you will, when you tap it out, you will have kind of the same effects, right? Like you will feel like you are not quite as awake, right?
Gotcha.
Or whatever, like that feeling you get. You guys know what I'm talking about. I think that you can. I think that you can hack the system with some things like that.
Cool.
That's my guess. That's
makes me-
my answer right now.
Yeah.
That one's pretty mutable as we go forward.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what you could do with that in Era 3.
Yeah. Like,
Because pharmaceuticals will exist.
yes, well, Era, we are already getting into the fact that
Yeah.
you could replicate a lot of things with. Once they figure out how to change types of investiture and whatnot, then suddenly you've got some wacky things going on. Which is why a Mistborn Cyberpunk would be so much fun, because metallurgic wetware would be fun, but no promises on that. I already have too many things to write. It's just that if I do write it and I make it a trilogy, then we have 16 books in the Mistborn series.
Which would be awesome.
Yeah. All right. How many of these Hero of Ages do we have left? Are we?
The last pile.
This is the last stack. Oh, and I didn't get through the last stack. Oh well. I want to go eat my dinner. So
That makes sense.
I am going to say, hey, thanks for hanging out, guys. This is a nice spoilerific stream. These are the first Thursday of every month. If you want to watch for the announcements and things. One upcoming will be during the day instead, but most of the time they will be from 6 until 8 mountain time.
Yeah, at
Just
least
mountain
if the schedule works, it will be during the day. I need to check that first.
I'm sure we can in the coming months. It may
Yes,
not be
sometime this summer probably.
Yeah. We will do one that way. But anyway, thank you guys for keeping me company. Thanks as always for reading the books. And you take care.